The day Rantis arrived, it had been raining for 11 days straight, Doctor. Mara Voss noticed him first at the ward window, not looking out at the courtyard the way patients usually did, with their noses pressed to the glass and their breath fogging little ellipses of longing, but standing 3 feet back, perfectly still, perfectly upright, his eyes fixed on some invisible southeast point beyond the wire fence and the flooded lot and the gray Buenos Aires sky. He stood that way for 40 minutes, she counted. She brought it up with Dr. Emilio Castan at the morning handoff. Castan was 53 and smelled of cold coffee and had not been surprised by anything in a long time. He pulled the new intake file from under a stack of referral forms and read it with the expression of a man who had misplaced something important and could not remember what. Arrived during the night shift, he said. Security found him in the Ward 2 corridor. No ID, no record of how he got through intake. He told the night nurse his name was Rantis. He set the file down, no last name, just Rantis. That's not a real name, Vossa said. No, Castan agreed. It's not. She was assigned the intake interview. She carried her notepad and a pen that kept running dry and sat across the small table from Rantis and studied him. He was perhaps 35, lean in the way of someone who ate precisely what was required, and no more. His eyes were dark and very steady, the kind of eyes that make you feel that the room has shifted slightly when they land on you. A thin white scar curved under his left ear, not surgical, not violent, something else, something she had no category for. Good morning, she said. Good morning, doctor. His Spanish was perfect, and his diction was unusual, not a foreign accent exactly, but the considered pronunciation of someone who had learned the language from books rather than from a childhood. I was wondering when someone would sit down with me. Can you tell me how you came to be here? He thought about this as though it were a genuine question deserving of a genuine answer, not a diagnostic probe. I arrived. That's the most honest answer. The mechanisms of my arrival are difficult to explain in terms your instruments could verify. She wrote, deflex, fluid, intelligent. Where are you from? Far from here, he said and smiled. A small smile, precise, like a door opening an inch and then closing again. I was sent to observe, to understand why your species makes the choices it makes. You are a very strange people, very beautiful, very destructive. I find it difficult to reconcile the two. You believe you're not human. I don't believe it. I know it. Belief implies uncertainty. He looked at the window. The rain was still falling. I don't fault you for labeling what you don't understand as pathology. It's efficient. Pathologizing the unfamiliar saves an enormous amount of cognitive effort. She looked up from her notepad. Most patients who tell me they're from another planet are either frightened or grandiose. You're neither. Should I be frightened? Most people would be, in a place like this. He looked around the room, the peeling paint, the wire-reinforced window, the bolted furniture, with the calm, methodical attention of a tourist in a museum. I've been in many places like this, on many worlds, he said. Every civilization, at a certain point in its development, builds rooms to put the people who see things differently. It's practically a universal constant. He paused. The rooms are always smaller than they need to be. She kept him in the ward for observation. She told herself it was standard protocol. By the 3rd day, she understood she was lying. He had a quality that the other patients responded to, like a warmth, a presence that moved through the ward and left things slightly better than they had been before. Old Marcos, who screamed every night and had to be sedated, slept through 2 consecutive nights after Rantis sat with him for an hour and spoke quietly in some language Voss could not identify. Senora Dominguez, who had not spoken since 1987, said the word rain on a Tuesday afternoon while standing beside Rantis at the window. The nursing staff stopped writing it down in the incident log after the 4th occurrence. They started writing it down again after the 6th. Voss brought her supervisor, Dr. Horacio Pimentel, to observe through the one-way glass. He's high-functioning, Pimentel said, probably a paranoid schizophrenic with a highly systematized delusional structure. Classic messianic subtype. He has a measurable effect on the other patients, Voss said. Charismatic personalities often do. Pimentel was already looking at his watch. Keep him on observation status. No excursions without clearance. And for God's sake, get him properly medicated. She asked Rantis that evening if he was willing to take the medication. He considered this with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. It will make it harder to transmit, he said. Transmit what? He glanced toward the southeast. The gesture was so natural, so reflexive, that it looked like checking the time. I have to face southeast to send. The angle from this continent to the relay is approximately 14 degrees below the horizon at this latitude. When I'm aligned correctly, I can compress a significant amount of data. You're saying you communicate with your home. With my instruments, yes. Your bodies would call what I do something like prayer, but the mechanism is different. He folded his hands in his lap. Though I sometimes think your species arrived at prayer as an intuition of something real. The posture is correct, the stillness, the orientation towards something larger than yourself. He looked at her steadily. I will take the medication if you think it's necessary. I understand that your position requires it. She told him she needed to think about it. She told herself she would medicate him by Friday. Friday came and went. There was a woman who visited him in his 3rd week. She came on a Tuesday, signing in as a family friend. Beatrice, no last name given, no record in any file. She was perhaps 28, dark-haired, with an economy of movement that reminded Voss of Rantis, that same quality of taking up exactly as much space as required, and no more. She sat with him in the visitor room for 2 hours. Voss watched through the window for 11 minutes before she admitted to herself that she was jealous of the easy fluency of their communication, the way they spoke without performing for each other. She introduced herself to Beatrice in the corridor afterward. You know him well, Voss said. Beatrice considered this in the same careful way Rantis considered everything. I know him as well as anyone here can know him, she said. He does important work. He cares about your people very much. Sometimes I think he cares too much. He feels what you feel, and humans feel a great deal of pain. You speak about him as though he's exactly what he says he is. Beatrice smiled. It was a very old smile for a young face. Doesn't he seem like exactly what he says he is? She did not answer that. She had stopped knowing how to answer it. The excursion to the outdoor concert was Voss's idea. In retrospect, she would spend a great deal of time examining this, the way one returns to a door left unlocked. She had cleared it with Pimentel, a small chamber orchestra, performing Beethoven in the public park, 4 patients, 2 orderlies, a controlled therapeutic outing. Pimentel had approved it with the distracted nod of a man thinking about something else. The evening was cool, the kind of autumn evening in Buenos Aires that smells of wet stone and car exhaust, and somewhere beneath both of those, inexplicably jasmine. They spread blankets on the grass, and the patients settled with the cautious pleasure of people who had forgotten that the outside world still existed, and were now recalling it gently, by increments. The orchestra began. Voss watched Rantis. She had been watching him for 3 weeks, and she knew his stillness by now, its texture, the quality of attention it contained, but this was different. As the strings opened the first movement he became, the only word she could find for it, alone at her kitchen table 2 weeks later, was unlocked, as though something had been released in him that had kept carefully contained on ordinary days. His eyes were very bright. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. When the Ode to Joy began, he stood up. Later, she would try to reconstruct the sequence. He walked. He walked directly and without hesitation toward the conductor's podium, not running, not furtive, with the calm purposefulness of someone going somewhere they have always been going. The conductor turned, a confusion of body language, a step backward, an opening of hands in something between outrage and uncertainty. And then Rantis spoke to him quietly, briefly, and the conductor did something that Voss would not have predicted with any statistical model she possessed. He handed over the baton. The music changed. It did not change in tempo or in score. The musicians were playing exactly what was on the page, but it changed in the way that weather changes, in direction and in pressure, something turning in the air above the park. Rantis conducted with his whole body, not with the formal economy of the trained musician, but with a completeness that suggested he was not directing the sound so much as receiving it, shaping it, returning it to the audience with something added. People who had been eating, talking, distracted, heads came up. Children stopped moving. An old man, 2 blankets over, placed his palm against the ground as though checking that the earth was still there. The other patients, back on the blankets, were standing. They were swaying slightly. Marcos had tears on his face and didn't seem to know it. Senora Dominguez was humming, actually humming, in the key of the melody, her eyes closed, her face turned up toward the gray-dark sky. The 2 orderlies looked at each other with the expression of people who have entered a room and found something unexpected and are deciding whether to say anything. The park security arrived at the edge of the conductor's space. One of them reached for Rantis's shoulder. The conductor stepped between them. Voss would replay this moment often. The conductor, silver-haired and furious 3 minutes ago, placing himself between a psychiatric patient and a security guard because because even he had felt it, whatever it was. Whatever Rantis was doing, it lived in the space where human being and sound intersected, and the conductor understood that space better than most people, and what he had witnessed in the last 4 minutes was not pathology. Rantis lowered the baton when the movement ended. He handed it back. He thanked the conductor in the careful, precise voice he used for everything. He came back to the blankets and sat down beside Voss and said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked you," she said. "Yes, you should have." He said, "Are you angry?" She looked at Marks, who was still weeping quietly with an expression on his face that she had never seen in 3 years of treating him, an expression of relief, so absolute it looked almost like pain. She said no, the police came anyway. Protocol was protocol. She rode with him to the station and spent 2 hours extracting him and brought him back to the ward in the early morning while the city was still asleep. And he said nothing the entire ride except, once quietly, "The 9th is remarkable." They understood something with it. Beethoven understood something. He couldn't hear it at the end, and he still understood it. She said, "What did he understand?" Rantis looked out the car window at the passing streetlights. "That the way through pain is not around it," he said. "It's through it and out the other side. Joy isn't the absence of suffering. It's the thing you find after." He was quiet for a moment. "Your species keeps forgetting that. It's your most persistent error." Pimentel suspended Voss's excursion privileges and ordered Rantis placed on a strict medication schedule. The medication made him slow. It made him careful in a different way, a medicated way, the carefulness of someone navigating a room with their eyes adjusting to dark. He still stood at the window facing southeast, but the stillness had a different quality now, effortful rather than natural. Beatrice came twice more, and Voss intercepted her the second time. "He's getting worse," Beatrice said. She was not accusing. She was simply reporting. "He's being treated." "For what?" "For a delusional disorder." Beatrice looked at her for a long moment. "He experiences what you experience," she said. "Your grief, your confusion, your loneliness. He absorbs it. It goes into him. He was designed with an error. They all know it. Back home, he was designed to observe, but he was given something that makes him unable to not feel. The others can maintain the separation. He can't." She paused. "The medication makes the separation impossible. It removes the buffer between what he feels and what he takes on. He's not getting clearer. He's drowning. You're telling me he's an empath. I'm telling you what's happening to him." Voss read his medication chart that night. She read it very carefully, then she read it again. She went to Pimentel's office. She said, "I think the medication protocol is causing a paradoxical effect. I'd like to discuss adjusting the dosage." Pimentel was tired. He had the look of a man who had been tired for several decades and had made a peace with it. "Voss," he said, "the patient is delusional and was arrested at a public disturbance. The protocol is appropriate. The patient is improving the condition of other patients without any structured therapeutic intervention." She said, "Marcos has slept through the night 6 times. Dominguez is using language. The ward has less incident activity than any comparable period in the last 4 years. Correlation. It's a strong correlation. Adjust the charting frequency if you're concerned. Don't adjust the medication without authorization." She left without adjusting the medication. She went home. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She thought about what Beatrice had said, and she thought about the conductor stepping between Rantis and the security guard, and she thought about Marcos's face in the park, the specific expression of relief it had held, and she thought about what Rantis had said about joy and pain and the way through. She went back. It was 2 in the morning. She let herself into the ward. Rantis was sitting in the common room in the dark, facing southeast through the window. He turned when she came in, not startled, as though he had known she was coming. "You came back," he said. "I wanted to ask you something." She sat across from him. The city hummed low beyond the wire. Why here? Why this ward, this hospital? Why not a university or a government office or anywhere that could actually... She stopped. "You said you were sent to observe." "Observe what?" "Suffering," he said immediately. "The productive kind. Not suffering as punishment or as failure, which is how your institutions tend to classify it. The kind that clarifies. The kind that strips everything away until you can see what remains." He looked at the dark window. "This is a place where everything has been stripped away from the people inside it. What remains is often very beautiful. Your planet's philosophers come closest to understanding this, but they keep getting buried under the institutional weight of their own systems. And what have you observed? That you endure, he said quietly. Endurance is unremarkable on most worlds. On yours, it has a quality I have no good word for in your language. Something between stubbornness and love. Something that keeps building even when everything keeps burning. He turned to look at her. I have observed a great many species. None of them are like you. None of them keep going the way you do. Not because they can't feel pain, they can, but because they let it mean something. You are the only species I've found that has evolved the capacity to take damage and decide, consciously, that the damage will mean something rather than simply be endured. You grieve and you make art out of it. You lose and you write it down so the next person knows they are not alone. There is no rational evolutionary reason for this. It is completely extraordinary. She sat with this for a while. Are you afraid, she asked finally. Of what? Of what they're going to do to you. The institution. Pimentel. I know what they'll do, he said simply. I knew before I arrived. Observation carries risk. And I told you I was designed with an error. The error was feeling. And the cost of feeling on your planet is that eventually everything catches up with you. He smiled. The small, precise door-opening smile. It was worth it. She could not sleep that night or the next. She wrote a formal objection to the treatment protocol and filed it with the hospital board. The board acknowledged receipt in a form letter. She wrote to Pimentel. He called her into his office and closed the door and told her, with genuine regret, that she was not doing herself any favors. She asked Rantis, on his 74th day in the ward, whether there was anything she could do. He thought about this for a long time. You can witness, he said. That's enough. That's more than enough. In my experience, witnesses are the rarest thing in any universe. Most of what happens to any living being happens without anyone seeing it, without anyone marking it. You've been marking it. He paused. You've been marking it from the first morning when you counted how long I stood at the window. She stared at him. 40 minutes, he said. I know you counted. She filed the formal objection again, refiled it with additional documentation, sent a copy to the Ministry Oversight Board, received a second form letter, stayed late 3 nights running to read his file again, to find something she'd missed, some procedural lever she hadn't pulled. She was at her desk when the night shift orderly found her and told her. Pimentel had authorized the electroconvulsive protocol without notifying her. The consent form had been signed by the hospital director as Rantis's authorized medical guardian, which was technically legal, which was part of what made it so easy to do and so hard to stop. Rantis had not been given the standard anesthesia preparation. His heart had stopped during the second application. The crash team had not been able to restore normal rhythm. She sat at her desk for a long time after the orderly left. Then she went to the ward. The patients were awake. Word moved through that population by means she had never been able to map. A kind of cellular information transfer that bypassed the usual channels. They were all awake. In the corridor or in their doorways, the lights off, the building humming its electrical hum, and they were not in distress in the way she would have predicted. They were very still. They had the quality of people listening for something. Old Marcos came to stand beside her. He took her hand, he said, and it was Marcos who screamed at night. Marcos, who had been sedated more nights than not, he said quietly. He went back. He went back for a while. He'll come back for us. He said it with a certainty so complete and so uncomplicated that she could not find the clinical category it belonged in. Not delusion. Not exactly. Something else. Something that lived in the space where the categories ran out. She filed a formal complaint against Pimentel the following morning. She copied the ministry, the hospital board, and the 2 medical ethics bodies with jurisdiction. Pimentel was placed on administrative review. The review lasted 11 months and concluded with a formal censure and no further action. She was told, gently, that she had not been present when the procedure was authorized and could not therefore be held responsible for its outcome. She understood this was meant as absolution. She did not accept it as such. She kept his file. Every week she read it through from the intake note to the final entry. She could not have explained why exactly, except that it felt like the thing Rantis had described, witnessing, marking, making sure the thing that had happened was not allowed to happen in the dark, without a record, without a hand that had noticed it. 2 years later, she presented a paper to a psychiatric conference in Cordoba. The paper was about the relationship between systemic institutional constraint and the misclassification of atypical presentations. It was careful, technical, fully cited. It said nothing about Rantis by name, but it described, in precise clinical language, what she had observed. The effect of one patient's presence on a ward population, the measurable improvements in incident frequency and in patient communication, the documented regression of those improvements after the institution of a pharmacological protocol, the complete reversal of progress following the patient's death. She presented it in a room of 50 colleagues. When she reached the data on the ward population's response to the patient's death, the cessation of self-harm incidents, the continuation of the improvement in patient communication even in the absence of the patient himself, the persistent orientation of 3 patients toward the southeast.
A woman in the third row raised her hand and said, "What do you attribute that to?"
Voss looked at her notes. She said, "I attribute it to the patients. They maintained something he showed them." The woman in the third row sat back. After a moment, she wrote something down. On the last night of the conference, Voss sat on the hotel balcony and faced the dark city and thought about what Rantis had said about endurance, the stubbornness and love of it. The way humans built again in the burned places, wrote down what had been lost so the next person wouldn't be alone in their losing. She had written it down. It was in the file and in the paper and in the statement she had given the ethics board, all of it archived in the places that archives lived, which was never the places you looked for them, but always, eventually, findable. The city breathed below her. She thought about Marcos, who had not been sedated in 8 months, who had a small garden now in the occupational therapy courtyard, who turned southeast every evening with the same unhurried certainty. She thought about Senora Dominguez, who had 23 words now, 23 words she used with great precision, who had been observed by one of the nursing staff to point to the eastern wall on a clear morning and say a word that no one recognized, repeated it 3 times with a patient instructive expression, and then gone back to her breakfast. She thought about what Rantis had said. "You are the only species I've found that has evolved the capacity to take damage and decide, consciously, that the damage will mean something." She thought about what it meant that the species he had said this about was also the species that had killed him in a hospital basement on a Thursday morning without giving him adequate anesthesia, on the authorization of a man who was tired and was sure he was right. She thought about holding both of those things at the same time. She thought it was probably the most human thing she had ever felt. Beatrice came to see her once more, 6 months after the conference. She appeared at the hospital the way she had appeared the first time, without record, without documentation, and she was precisely as she had been, and she sat across from Voss in the visitor room and looked at her with eyes that held the same quality as Rantis's eyes, that quality of a room shifting slightly when they land on you. "He was right about you," Beatrice said. Voss waited. "He said you would witness. He said you would make sure it was real." She was quiet for a moment. "It's very difficult for us to grieve. We were designed differently, but I think I'm learning it. I think I'm learning it from you, from the file, from the paper." She looked at her hands. "From the fact that you came back at 2 in the morning to ask him a real question." "Did it help?" Voss asked. "Anything I did. Any of it." Beatrice thought about this with the careful completeness they both shared. "He said that on most worlds the person in your position chooses the institution, the mechanism, the thing that keeps the room organized and the documents filed and the approved protocols followed." She looked up. "You chose him. A person always knows when they've been chosen. It changes what's possible for them." She paused. "What's possible afterward for anyone watching?" She left the way she always left, completely, without remainder. Voss sat in the visitor room for a long time. Through the window, she could see the courtyard where Rantis had stood. It was empty in the late afternoon light, the grass growing up through the cracks in the concrete, the wire fence, making its patient geometry against the gray sky. She picked up her pen. She started writing. Not a paper this time, not a clinical document. Something she had no form for, which meant she would have to make the form herself, which was, as best she could tell, exactly what he had meant. Somewhere in the ward, Marcos was tending his garden. Senora Dominguez was at the window, using her 23 words in combinations that the nursing staff had begun, quietly, to transcribe, because the combinations were beginning to mean something. Because they were beginning to mean something, and because someone had decided they should be marked, and because the humans who witness things leave them less alone in the dark. The city turned. The autumn came on. Somewhere to the southeast, very far away, Something received what had been sent and processed it, and filed it, and moved on to the next case. And in the file, in the archive, in the paper, in the conference proceedings of a psychiatric meeting in Cordoba, in a year that seemed ordinary from the outside, in the case notes of a tired doctor who had once sat across from something extraordinary and chosen, against every institutional instinct, to see it clearly, in all of those places he remained, not dead, not returned, something more durable than either, witnessed,